Hey everyone, I'm Jack Monsted. I am the assistant curator here at Blandy Experimental Farm, and today we are going to what's our state arboretum of Virginia, and today we are going to go on a little walk of the native plant trail. So, the native plant trail is this area that you see behind me. This is our woodland area. We've got a lot of really great wildflowers growing at this time of year. Spring is by far the best time to see wildflowers in forested areas or in areas that have a lot of tree cover because it's the time before the leaves appear on the trees, and so the wildflowers, the little wildflowers on the forest floor, have a lot of time to soak up sunlight before the leaves come out and shade them out. So in a few minutes here we're going to get started, and we're just going to sort of walk through the trail here, and we're going to talk about, I'm just going to showcase some of my favorite plants that we see on the trail, some of the stuff that's coming up now. I'll point out some of the key features, and then we'll also point out some of the things that will be blooming soon. This is a really exciting time of year because we're just kind of at the beginning of the bloom, so we're seeing a bunch of early bloomers come up, and over the next few weeks, every day that you come out here, you can see something totally new flowering that you haven't seen before. So this is a really cool time in this area, and I'm excited to share with you guys sorts of things that are coming up here and what I'm out here looking at every day. So first we're going to sort of poke back into the woods here a little bit, and we're going to look at one of my favorite plants. Now I'm going to say one of my favorite plants a whole lot throughout this because they're kind of all my favorite plants. But one of my favorite plants that's starting to bloom right now is this one right here, and this is called blue cohosh. Now the blue cohosh, this is just starting to flower, it's just emerged, and you can see if you look really closely right here, they have these little yellow and purple and kind of bluish flowers. If you see these plants when they're fully mature, the name blue cohosh is a bit of a misnomer because it just has these yellow flowers and these green leaves and doesn't look very blue. But if you see it right now, as it's just starting to emerge, you can see these young stems are really quite blue. And the flower buds themselves, before they open up, are kind of bluish. So that's really kind of one of the cool aspects of this, seeing this come up so early, is it kind of makes the name make a little bit more sense than if you were to see this thing in full bloom, and it doesn't look really that blue at all. But yeah, blue cohosh, really cool plant. It was used historically for different medicinal purposes. There's a whole host of different purposes it was used for, but nowadays we mostly just kind of enjoy it as a nice, nice landscape plant here, and one of our coolest early blooming native perennials. Right in front of this, I want to point out really quick too, right next to this over here, we have a really cool plant here called Spring Beauty. So this is a Spring Beauty. It's just this tiny little plant. It's a little herb on the ground. It kind of has these shoestring type leaves, and they have these beautiful little flowers, and the flowers are mostly white, and they have these pink lines in them if you look closely. And the pink lines inside the flower are called nectar guides because they guide the pollinators, the bees and such, to where the nectar is in the flower. So these are just very small, but you'll see them popping up all over the woodland here in different areas. You keep a close eye out for them. You can always see them, and they're always kind of a delight, kind of spicing up the woodland here. And this other plant right next to it here is another one that's just getting started here. So the Spring Beauties, that's about as big as they get. But for this plant right here, this is a pretty small, pretty young plant so far. It's called Jacob's Ladder. And it kind of has like these ladder-like leaves, I guess you could say. So I kind of understand why they would call it Jacob's Ladder. And this isn't flowering yet, but it has, you can see some flower buds here getting ready to go in the next few weeks. And when this flowers, it'll have little clusters of blue kind of hanging bell-like flowers that look really nice. So that's Jacob's Ladder. Cool.
Okay.
So we've already gotten 3 flowers here, and we're going to go walk through and see a couple more. And I wonder what our count will be by the end. Before we continue on, I want to point out really quick, we have a brand new brochure here on the trail that we just finished a few weeks ago. This is called the Wildflowers of Spring, and it's a plant identification guide. So if you're into this kind of walk and like walking through and looking to try to find all these different wildflowers, this guide will really give you a leg up. It's a cool little brochure. It just kind of describes some of the most common flowers that we have out here on the trail, and you can feel free to take it with you, and you'll be able to, hopefully use the guide, kind of see what the pictures of the flowers look like and compare it to what you're seeing out in the field, and hopefully learn to identify a few of these plants on your own. So cool little brochure. If you're ever out here, feel free to grab one of those. All right, now we're going to go down the path a little bit here. And I want to take a quick stop here at this first cluster of plants. So if you look down, there's a whole cluster of flowers right here, and they don't look like much right now. They're kind of all just sort of green, leafy things, and they have these occasional tall spikes. Now, these are all flower buds. In the next couple of days, these are really about ready to open. In the next couple of days, all these buds are going to open up. And when you first see these flower buds, you see they're kind of like a dark purple flower bud. You think, oh, this is going to be some kind of strange purple flower. That's not the case. Actually, when they open up, they're going to be bright yellow. These are called golden ragwort. And you can see this one, you can almost see the little yellow petals just starting to emerge right there on that flower. So in the next couple of days, this whole area will be covered in bright yellow flowers. And we've got several other patches of them throughout the native plant trail as well that will be really nice. So that's golden ragwort, and it has this nice, the leaves here are an evergreen ground cover. And then in the spring, the tall flowering spikes come up and the flowers come out. So another really cool plant. Great use as a ground cover if you have kind of a shady area that you want to have some nice evergreen cover, but with some nice spring flowers. Okay, good. Walk down a little bit more here. Here's one that's pretty bright and hard to miss. This is actually a little annual. This isn't much. This is actually called yellow fumewort. And it's a little annual plant that kind of likes these sort of rocky areas, these little rocky edges like we have here in the woodland. And it's an annual that just sort of seeds itself, and it grows in the first year, and then it sets seed, and then it dies. And it doesn't continue the next year, and all the ones that come back the next year have to regerminate from seed again. This is actually an interesting one because it's one that we did not plant in the trail. This one that's just kind of recruited on its own. It just appeared here and seeded itself somehow. A bird dropped it off or something. But we like it, and it's a native plant and it's kind of showy. And so if it's not crowding out anything else, we like to leave it and just let it do its thing. So that's a yellow fumewort. I'm going to step over here and over this into the pathway here because I know what I'm looking at, so I think I know what not to step on, but usually we try to encourage visitors to stay along the path just so we don't accidentally trample some of these really, really small plants. But in here we have some kind of cool plants growing right now. So this plant right here, this is just kind of this grassy stuff all over here. This is all Pennsylvania sedge. So it's Carex pennsylvanicus, the fancy scientific name, and it's Pennsylvania sedge, and it has these little flowers. So it's flowering right now. This is what it looks like in full bloom. These little yellow flowers, and it's kind of nice. That's about all it does. So it has these little grass-like leaves, and then it has this nice flowering little grassy flowers here in the spring. Then the flowers go away, and then the green leaf blades just kind of stay there. This is another one that I really like as a ground cover. It needs a little bit of shade, but it's pretty tolerant of a wide range of soils, and it lets a lot of other interesting stuff grow up kind of between it. So if you could do a mixture of like this Pennsylvania sedge with some blue phlox or some bluebells or trillium or something, it looks really nice. So that's our Pennsylvania sedge. Right next to it over here, we've got a really, really nice big patch of Cecil Trilliums. So trilliums are kind of one of my favorite plants. They're one of the first little understory herbs I ever learned to identify. And these things are just so cool. They have, if you look really closely at trilliums, what kind of defines the plant is that this right here is just one plant by itself. So it's got 3 leaves, all arranged, in a perfect angles here to each other. 3 leaves, and then it's got 3 of these little bracts, which are these little tiny, smaller leaf-looking things. And then it has 3 flower petals. So it's got 1, 2, and 3. And these ones don't, because of the species that this one is, these petals don't open up. We do have some white trilliums that the petals will get a lot bigger and they'll open up fully and have this beautiful looking flower. But they grow a little bit slower, so they're not ready just yet. They haven't started blooming yet. But these Cecil Trilliums, they look really nice, and they're already, this is about full bloom for them. Another cool thing about these plants is just all the different coloration they have on their leaves. You can see if you look closely, there's like different colored spots on the leaves. You know, sometimes it's dark, some spots are little dark spots, little light green spots, dark green spots. Certain ones, like this one back here, is almost like black coloration on it, or like really, really dark gray coloration on it, on those leaves. So they've got a lot of different colored leaves, which is kind of cool. One theory about why they have colored leaves is that it helps them blend into the forest floor. So if a hungry deer or other herbivore is walking by, they don't stick out as much, and they're less likely to be eaten. And then hiding right here in the middle of this patch of trilliums is a patch of another early spring plant called a bloodroot. So that's what this is right here. You can see I'm holding the leaf right now. And see, this leaf is kind of interesting. It looks different from the trillium leaves. It kind of has these weird lobes all around it. So these bloodroot, it may look like they're being swallowed up by the trilliums right now, and they a little bit are, but they've already done their thing. They've already flowered, and they're going to seed already. So these are one of the first plants to emerge in spring. They emerged right away. They probably were up by mid-March. They had little white flowers, beautiful white flowers. And now that the flowers are done, you can see there's this little seed pod right here. So this seed pod used to be a flower. There's a nice about 2-inch white flower right there. And then after it gets pollinated, the petals fall off, and this is being filled up with seeds right now. And as the seeds mature, eventually this will open up and disperse the seeds for the next generation. So yeah, we have a really nice patch here of trilliums, bloodroot, just some sedge, just a really nice collection of plants right here in the middle of these rocks. All right, so let's go on a little bit more and see what else we have. And a little bit more is right next door here, because look at this. We have Virginia bluebells. Virginia bluebells are kind of everyone's favorite, and rightly so. They're really, really showy plants. This time of year, they're just about in full bloom. I would say they're not quite there yet. There are some that have not yet flowered here, but they're doing really close to full bloom, especially this patch right here. So cool thing about these flowers is that these blue ones, they're called bluebells because they're blue when they're fully mature. That's like this blue one right here that's totally open. So as they get fully mature, they turn blue like this. But when they're not fully mature, and they're not quite open yet, they're this pink color. Oh, we have a little bee here visiting us. A little honeybee visiting the bluebells. Yeah, as you can see, the pollinators love these bluebells. Earlier, I was just out here and I saw a queen bumblebee out here pollinating some of these bluebells. A lot of our native bumblebee queens emerge very early, and they actually have to do some foraging on their own to build their own nest before they can lay all their worker bees. So, very important flower for early emerging bees. So anyway, that was a very nice little interruption by that bee. It's always nice when the pollinators show up. So you have the bluebells, and then you have the flowers turn pink when they're small. So as these sort of mature, they go from pink to blue, and the end result is, if you look at the whole plant, there's some pink ones, some blue ones at any given time, and it has this really nice just color effect overall. And there's some suspicion that a lot of the pollinators, like those bees, can probably see the difference between the pinks and the blues, and they know to look for the blue ones because those are the ones that are ripe and full of nectar for them. Right. We've got some good patches there. If you look out over here, we've got a whole bunch of nice more bluebells, and we've got other patches all throughout the woodland here. The Virginia bluebells are really one of the greatest shows. And they're only here for a few weeks. So one thing I didn't mention about a lot of these plants is that they are what we call spring ephemerals, which is a fancy word to basically say that they only appear in the spring. They're all storing all their energy in these underground rhizomes, these big bulbs underground. And then in the early spring, they'll come up and they'll bloom, they'll flower. And then once they're done flowering and they set their seed, all the above ground growth dies off, usually by early June, and for the rest of the year they just stay totally underground. So if you were to come back to this spot in June or July, you would never even know that the bluebells are here, even though they're dominating the scenery right now. So this is definitely the time to see them. If you want to come out and see a lot of really cool wildflowers, come out here in the next few weeks for sure. One other thing I wanted to point out while I'm over here is right back down here we have a bunch of, these are actually ramps. So they're just really small little leaves. They don't look like much. They're just green leaves. And we have only one little patch here. This is the only patch we have in the woodland. It's just these couple of little clumps of ramps. And these are basically wild onions. So they are edible. These take a very long time to grow though. So we planted these probably about at least 6 or 7 years ago, and they're still pretty small here. They're plants that from sowing the seed to getting a mature plant can often take almost 5, 6, 7 years. But once they do get established in an area, and if they're just in an area that they just like perfectly, they'll just spread out and take over the whole area because they also spread through underground rhizomes. So these are really cool plants. They'll be flowering here soon, but the flowers don't look like much. They're just little white buds. But in the onion family, a really cool plant. They're really aromatic and they're just interesting to see around.
Oh, there's a bumblebee.
We got another bee. That one's busy. That looks like a bumblebee. So yeah, we have those. There's a bunch of other stuff happening here too. I mean, we have back here, we have these little plants. You can only see the leaves right now, so they're not really showing too much. But this is a wild geranium. So they have these, you can tell if you know anything about geraniums, the leaves look pretty similar to that. But this is a native wild geranium, has a little pink flower, which will be coming up here in a few weeks. We also have a bunch of little blue phlox as ground cover. So a lot of this little ground cover, all this little green stuff that you see all along here, most of that is blue phlox. And that hasn't flowered yet, but doesn't look like much now. It looks like a bunch of little leaves in the ground. But come back in 2 or 3 weeks and we'll have beautiful big blue and purple flowers all over here, in addition to the Virginia bluebells that are already blooming. So there's a lot of really cool stuff just getting ready to happen. And like I said, if you blink, you miss it. So you have to, definitely worth checking it out if you ever get a chance to come out here. All right, so walk down the stairs here and look at a few more things before we head out. Well, first I want to mention this. Forgot about this tree.
Yep.
So this is one of our redbud trees. We have a whole lot of these redbud trees here in the Native Plant Trail. And these are super cool trees. They don't get very big. They're usually good understory trees, maybe 10, 20 feet tall max. But they have these beautiful pink flowers on them. I'm sure you've seen them. People like to plant them in their yards. They make great yard trees. And again, they're very important for bees and other pollinators once they bloom. So these little flower buds on them, they're pink and they look like they're just about to go. They haven't quite opened yet. Once they open, they'll be a lot showier. And when you come out here, and if you just look through the canopy, once these bloom, you'll just see, it'll be all pink. It'll look like almost an entirely pink tree canopy. So they're a very cool tree. Just getting started though, once again. We're on the early stages of the bloom for this year. Okay, so we'll go down here and just got a few more plants to show you. I want to poke over here really quick just to show you a plant that isn't even close to blooming yet. But this plant right here, it's kind of hard to pick out because the stems are so dark. But this is what we call black cohosh. So earlier we saw the blue cohosh. That was the first plant we saw that we just started off with. It kind of had bluish stems and bluish flower buds. And if you look at this one, the stems are a lot darker. I don't know if that's why they actually call it black cohosh, but it seems to lend credence to the name. There's these really dark brown, almost black stems. And as they open up, once this matures, it won't be this darkly colored. It'll just be a normal green leaves like you're used to seeing. But just kind of cool to see these coming up. They won't flower for another, probably until late May or early June. So they're almost like an early summer bloomer. They're not really a spring bloomer, but cool plants nonetheless. Right. So now we're down here, and then amongst this rock outcrop, there's some pretty interesting stuff coming up. One of the coolest things is this big patch of, these are called large flowered bellworts. So believe it or not, these are actually in full bloom. They kind of just hang. It's kind of unusual. You see these plants and they're kind of dangling. The flowers are just kind of hanging down, looking all sad and droopy. But that's actually, you know, that's what they're supposed to look like. They're not. This isn't a sick plant. It's not like it's wilting because it doesn't have enough water. That's just sort of the look of the plant. And these yellow flower petals in here, if you look in here, there is pollen and nectar and all that good stuff right in there. And so a lot of times bees will come along here and you'll see them kind of climbing up into the flowers from below, which is kind of interesting. Just really cool little patch of large flowered bellworts right there. And then over here we have a sign. This is one of our lovely interpretive signs here on the Native Plant Trail, and this sign talks specifically about wildflowers. So if you're really interested in wildflowers and learning more about them, and more about the ecology of the wildflowers and kind of where they grow and why they grow where they do, it's great to come out and check and sort of, as you're strolling through, read some of the signs and kind of learn more about that kind of stuff. Yeah, so we come down here. There's a couple more, one or two more things that we point out here before we go. This right here, you'll see a lot of these in the woodland over the coming weeks. With this yellow flower right here, this is called a wood poppy. So this is a native wood poppy, and you can see it just has 4 little yellow flower petals and a whole bunch of little anthers in there with pollen on them, and it has these kind of interesting leaves. You know, the kind of really finely divided leaves, and these little seed pods after they're done flowering. So the flower buds look like kind of fuzzy like this, and then after they're done flowering, they'll form another seed pod that looks kind of fuzzy as well. So they're just kind of cool. They kind of seed throughout here. We've planted a bunch of them, but they've also kind of just sort of seeded themselves out and around the garden. And you know, we're always happy when nature does our gardening for us and puts in a bunch of plants for us, so we don't have to. That's always kind of enjoyable when that happens. Yeah, so this is the Native Plant Trail in springtime. There's a lot of stuff happening right now. You know, as I said, these plants they're all flowering and they're all getting ready to go and put in all of their work before the trees leaf out. And with all this rain we've been getting, so we've been having pretty much non-stop rain for the past 2 days here, and probably still another day or 2 to go. I think we're going to see a lot of action the next week or so. So all the rain, and then it's going to warm up, and we're going to see a lot of growth and a lot of really cool stuff happening. So we'll be doing our best out here working to keep the weeds out and keeping it looking nice for you guys. And yeah, hope to see you guys out here. And if you're ever out here and you see me working in the woodland or something, feel free to stop by, say hi. You know, I'm always happy to chat about plants or whatever's on your mind out here. So yeah, thanks for coming out and joining us for this little walk through here. And we'll wrap it up here then.
Cool.